Tonight on the Donlon Report, America's 20-year war in Afghanistan will be over on August 31st. But as the U.S. pulls out, the Taliban advances. What does that mean for the future of Afghanistan? Chicago Public Schools offering free condoms to students, starting with fifth graders. How young is too young? NFL Hall of Famer Terrell Owens weighs in on paying college athletes. And get ready for this, his venture into the wine industry. He joins us live. The Donlon Report starts right now.
I will not send another generation of Americans to war in Afghanistan with no reasonable expectation of achieving a different outcome.
Good evening. Great to have you with us. Of course, President Biden today talking about the situation in Afghanistan, where the U.S. troop withdrawal is underway. And already we're seeing the impact. Emboldened Taliban fighters are making rapid advances in large swaths of the country, even moving in around the critical city of Kabul. Fighting has raged in that area for 2 days now. President Biden took questions from reporters today. It got heated at times, and he reiterated the U.S. mission there will conclude at the end of next month, August 31st, bringing an end to our nearly 20-year presence there.
No, I do not trust the Taliban. No, no, no. It's up to the people of Afghanistan to decide on what government they want, not us to impose the government on them. Never has Afghanistan been a united country, not in all of its history.
So that is where we start tonight. News Nation's Allison Harris is at the White House with more on President Biden's response today. Allison?
Well, Joe, the president was adamant. He does not believe that the U.S. can remain tethered to policies that were created 20 years ago. He says the threat of terror for this country has moved and it has metastasized. The president, as you just showed, had some heated exchanges with reporters today, one of them in which he said the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan is not inevitable.
But I trust the capacity of the Afghan military, who is better trained, better equipped.
Now, the president says that it's not inevitable, that the Afghan military has the resources that they need, but the Taliban is relentless. Maps that track the Taliban show that they are surging. They're taking control of half the districts in Afghanistan, according to some reports, getting closer to the capital of Kabul. And there are concerns that Kabul could fall. The U.S. military saying that the withdrawal is now more than 90% complete, ending America's longest war. The president, who has long opposed troops remaining permanently in Afghanistan, says no nation, no outside force has ever unified the country, and the U.S. did not go there to nation build.
The mission was accomplished in that we got Osama bin Laden, and terrorism is not emanating from that part of the world. And that's why I believe that this is the right decision and, quite frankly, overdue.
And we have that stat that more than 90% of the withdrawal is complete, but the Pentagon will not say exactly how many U.S. troops remain in Afghanistan right now. But after 20 years, after $2 trillion spent, after more than 2,400 Americans have been killed there, with thousands more returning home with mental health issues, the president says today that he wants them out by the end of August. As you said, this is the most today that the president has talked about drawing down troops in Afghanistan since he announced the plan in mid-April. Then he said that the target date was September 11th, the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Joe?
Allison, what are you hearing from lawmakers as a response to today's comments?
Yeah, so just this evening, we're hearing from Republicans who are criticizing the president for giving, quote, false hope to people that the Afghan military does stand a chance to fight off the Taliban. They're also criticizing the president for not publicly sharing more about what's going to happen after troops leave Afghanistan. We do know that troops are not necessarily abandoning Afghanistan. There will be troops that remain. Again, we don't know how many, but there will be some who stay there for any counterterrorism operations that arise and to help secure the U.S. Embassy and do some other things. But Republicans wanting more from the president and criticizing how he's handling this.
Well, the president certainly having no problem showing he can spar with reporters. That was lively today for sure. Leading us off tonight from the White House, Allison Harris, thank you. For more on this now, we want to turn to Jason Beardsley. He's the National Executive Director of the Association of the U.S. Navy. Jason, the last time we talked, you thought our exit there was sloppy and unorganized. What's your assessment of what's happening right now?
Right. Well, I stick to that assessment. We know it's been 15 years that the generals and politicians have been in charge of the plans in Afghanistan. Those of us who are on the ground, I never served in Afghanistan, but in Iraq, those who have served on the ground, we're willing to fight. We're committed to this. But what we've never heard are clearly articulated objectives for the military. And we have generals and we have politicians, both Republican and Democrat, 3 administrations who all agreed that they couldn't come up with a clear reason for us to be there. So when you're going to risk soldiers' lives, you better have a darn good reason.
But the president today said that he didn't think it was inevitable that the Taliban will take over there. Do you agree with that?
You know, in some sense, he may have a point if we cede to China, sort of filling the power vacuum. You and I talked about that the other night. China can come in with a lot of money and end up buying off a lot of people. That's easy to do there. And they're talking about billions, not millions.
Jason, I'm wondering, wasn't this inevitable? I mean, this is one of the reasons why none of the previous administrations wanted to mention any specific date. What we're seeing with this Taliban push was bound to happen, really, no matter when we left, wasn't it?
Not necessarily. What we've said all along is we're looking for leadership to come up with creative solutions. How do you secure whatever peace you've been able to get on the ground? It would look like a lot of security cooperations in the region, making sure we have strong allegiances, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, India, Pakistan, and then we have basing opportunities all throughout the Gulf region. So there are ways that we could continue to put pressure on the governments in the near region so that they're not sponsoring the violence that happens on the ground.
Do you think the Afghan military is up to this, Jason? I mean, can they protect these cities, do you think? What are the challenges for them? Not to mention the fact that a lot of the Afghan fighters are dropping their weapons literally and going across the border.
Well, I'll just tell you what I've heard from my peers, folks who have served in combat. The answer to that is no. We've always known, and we've been saying it for 20 years now, that whether it was the Afghan forces or the Iraqi forces, we have told our senior leaders consistently that if we were to leave, they're not sufficiently trained or developed to do this on their own. So that's been no secret. And if you ask anybody that served on the ground there, they'll tell you the same.
Despite what we heard from the president today saying the Taliban is wildly outnumbered and outgunned.
It's not just a factor of the Taliban. It's all the other violent forces. It's the incursion of Islamic State. It's Al-Qaeda. It's Pakistan has some interest there. There's a lot of players that are willing to stir up rivalries on the ground. So it's a multiple faceted combination of forces. So yes, I think that there's a good chance we'll see an erosion. But again, China has an opportunity to come in and lay down some money. That's not our best interest. Make no mistake. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but the truth is they're going to have the next sort of turn in the barrel, as we said, to stabilize the ground and bring some peace there. But we'll see.
What about the people of Afghanistan and the government there? Have we left them enough? And can they? We've talked about the military. Are they up to this and what they have ahead to work for their country?
Well, we need to be kind of skeptics about this. Again, our folks on the ground have always said they were going to need a lot more help to get to the point of self-sufficiency. Government is hard. Doing self-governance is hard. The military is not good at training other people how to do that. So no, I think the people in Afghanistan and the government in Afghanistan are still in a very nascent stage of how do they do this on their own, which is going to open up the vacuum again for a proxy to come in and sort of deliver that, just like we saw in Iraq with Iran sort of proxying the government there. So it leaves the door wide open for someone else.
Jason Beardsley, we always appreciate having your insight on Afghanistan. It's great to have your voice with us again tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
Chicago schools to start giving condoms to students as young as 10 years old. Is that too young? And a former police captain will be the Democrat on the ticket for New York City mayor. How much did that law enforcement aspect come into play? We'll get into that. Plus, we're happier than we've been in more than a decade as a country, according to a new Gallup poll. We'll discuss why more people say they're thriving on the other side of the pandemic. That's ahead. And don't forget, you can follow us on social media at the Donlon Report on Twitter. We are back with a couple of headlines. First, a major announcement from Tokyo. Organizers of the Olympics have announced they will ban all spectators for the upcoming games in the capital city. That move comes after the government of Japan declared a state of emergency amid surging COVID-19 cases, and just 2 weeks before the Olympics were set to start on July 23rd. In Surfside, Florida, wanted to share these images with you. Search and rescue crews paused yesterday to honor the lives lost in the condo collapse. They recovered 4 more victims today. The death toll now at 64, with another 76 unaccounted for. The rescue effort has now shifted to recovery, but powerful images tonight from Surfside. With that as a backdrop, we pivot, as we like to do here, to something more positive. A new Gallup poll shows we are collectively doing much better. In fact, nearly 60% of those surveyed say they are thriving. And that's the highest that number has been in 13 years. Joining me now, Dr. Patrice Harris, past president of the American Medical Association. Doctor, your specialty is psychiatry. What does that poll say to you, and did the numbers surprise you?
Well, with the vaccine rollout and recently improving economic news, I am not surprised. There certainly has been increasing optimism over the last several months. And I think the biggest contributor to that is our ability to socially connect. You know, we've all seen the stories of the grandparents seeing their grandchildren, some for the very first time, the ability to connect with parents, and the ability to get back out there and have dinner and attend baseball games. So I'm not surprised, and I'm very glad to see this.
Well, we've gone through a lot, Doctor, in the last year, and a lot of trauma for that matter. I guess things that we've really never had to deal with. We've been locked down, we've been isolated. Are things going better in a way that maybe we're not aware of? In other words, maybe are we coming out of this pandemic with stresses and other factors that we haven't thought about just yet because we haven't dealt with them?
You know, we are, and I am so glad you amplified the issue around trauma. This has been a very difficult time, a very traumatizing time with all the losses and the grief, the missed opportunities to celebrate those milestones. And the numbers you show is 60%, right? That's not 100%. So that means, and I would, by the way, like to see that data disaggregated, and we really need to dig beneath those numbers, because that means that 40% don't consider themselves to be thriving. And we really need to remain vigilant and make sure needs are addressed in the future.
Yeah, this gave a lot of people, the pandemic, Doctor, a chance to sort of reflect on their lives and on their work. And it's led to a lot of changes, really, in a lot of ways. Is that, do you think, a good thing, people hitting the reset button?
You know, clearly this was a tough time, but there have been some silver linings. And I have heard this from so many folks, that they had the opportunity to stop. And of course, we saw some things that needed to be amplified, such as health inequities and other issues there. But people also are reprioritizing their lives. Do they really want to spend 2 hours in traffic? Do they really want to work 60 hours a week? And, you know, we saw a report earlier today that talked about burnout, not new, but in some ways increased during this time. So we have to make sure that we are addressing these issues. I predict, and I don't do that often, but I predict over the next couple of years, there will be a resettling around priorities and around employment.
Well, that's a great point, and it leads us into my next question, actually, a poll that we found on monster.com, and the headline certainly caught our attention. 95% of workers are considering quitting. I mean, that number was staggering, I thought. Changing jobs, correct me if I'm wrong here, is one of the most stressful things in life. I mean, it's right up there with the death of a loved one and moving, isn't it?
It is, and it has been, but perhaps people are thinking about that again as they are reprioritizing. But I, like you, thought that 95% was staggering. I am the CEO of a company called eMed, and we discussed that very report today in executive leadership. Again, that report highlighted burnout, but people are looking at what they want to do. You know, a lot of folks are considering entrepreneurship in this new economy. So that was a very interesting number as well.
Doctor, we get so much response when we talk about mental health. It connects with so many people because it impacts so many people. And I think before we let you go, I would like to just touch on that. You mentioned the 40% who aren't thriving. For those who are worried about their mental health, what's a message you would leave with them tonight?
You know, that is a silver lining that people are now talking about mental health, because for so many years there's been a stigma about talking about this. But I think this pandemic has elevated the critical nature of discussing mental health. But now, as a country, as a society, we have to make sure that resources are available. But I encourage everyone to be okay with not being okay. Seek help, either your own physician, your local community mental health center. There are 1-800 lines available. So really seek help if you need it.
Dr. Patrice Harris, past president of the American Medical Association. It's so great to have you with us tonight. Also co-founder and CEO of eMed. Let's mention that as well. Take care. Thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Democrats frequently targeting Jeff Bezos and his wealth. Senator Bernie Sanders now calling it morally obscene. We'll get into that. And Democrats pick a moderate and former cop for mayor in New York City. Was rising crime in that city a factor? Well, it took a couple of weeks to count the ballots, but New York has a Democratic nominee for mayor in the big city. Eric Adams, a former police captain, will lead the ticket. This comes as crime is on the rise in the Big Apple. Auto theft this year, for example, up nearly 26%. Murder up 11%. Felony assault up as well. Also notable, Adams is known as a moderate. The AP calling his win a surge for moderate Democrats. Could that be the way forward for the party and for Adams' bid to become the city's second ever black mayor? Let's ask Zeek, Arkham, an active police officer in New York, and Rochelle Ritchie, a former press secretary for Democrats in the House. Rochelle, let's start with you and the political implications here. What do you read into Adams winning the Democratic primary here?
Well, I'm really excited about Eric Adams. I think we should start calling New York City Adams Apple, if you will. I think it's kind of cute. But I really am excited about him because of his experience with police. I feel that at this moment in time when we're dealing with a lot of police brutality and law enforcement issues, I think that having someone that knows how to get the police department to work smarter is definitely going to be key in fighting crime. And when you look at his proposal of cutting the budget by $500 million by ensuring that officers are really spending their time not worried about paperwork and court appearances, but really fighting crime, I think that's extremely important for the city of New York.
Zeek, what does this say to you about how crime and policing are now suddenly front and center in New York City? Adams, of course, a former police captain, and the Republican, Curtis Sliwa, who founded the Guardian Angels.
Well, people don't feel safe. You know, like you said, crime is up. Felony assaults are up, shootings are up, carjackings are up. You're not going to convince someone that just finished watching someone get robbed that the city is safe. So, of course, this was first and foremost on just about every voter's mind. They want to feel safe. They want to feel safe going to their jobs. They want to feel safe in their homes. And if Adams is going to bring that, and he's going to work with the police and work with the neighborhood to do so, then kudos to him. I just hope he's able to implement it.
Rochelle, do you think this is a sign for Democrats, especially as we look at the upcoming midterms, pushing back on a defund message that Republicans are certainly using against them?
Well, yeah, I'm an independent. And so I definitely think that there are a lot more moderate Democrats out there that are not in support of the defund police, particularly because there was no context behind that. It seems like it was sort of a slogan that was chanted out at a protest and everybody jumped on the bandwagon. And suddenly defund the police became abolish the police. And so you had people in Congress trying to backtrack away from it or trying to come up with their own agenda. So it's never really been clear. And I think it's important that when we talk about defund the police, let's keep in mind that many of the police brutality cases that have been publicized on national networks did not always necessarily involve a military style weapon. And a lot of times when you hear people talk about defund the police, they're saying, well, police don't need these military tanks and these different things. Well, a knee is what killed George Floyd, not a military tank, not a military-style weapon by the police. So I think that those moderate Democrats are going to be excited to see someone like Eric Adams come on board, especially because he is an African-American man.
Zeek, you're in the state. What do you think the next New York City mayor should do about crime?
I think he should let the police do their jobs. I mean, you've got, like was mentioned, you've got defund the police. You've got other programs like the bail system that was pretty much elevating criminals and giving criminals a chance to go out now and feel like they were empowered to do what they wanted to do. You had a lot of police scared to do their jobs. You had police demoralized, so they didn't want to go out and do their jobs. And I think Eric Adams should empower the police, allow the police to go out there and actually fight crime. Work with the DAs so that they actively go after criminals and charge them. Go after judges so that they impose sentences. Make crime unappealing to criminals. That's the best thing he can do.
Right. Rochelle, we've been so focused on COVID. I think a lot of politicians maybe were surprised that the issue suddenly in New York turned to crime. How do you bridge this within a party? People want police reform, but crime is a big issue.
Crime is certainly a big issue, not just in cities like New York or in Chicago, where I am, but I do think that we have to also, which Eric Adams' campaign has said he's going to do, is look at the impact that some of these social justice and health concerns have had on the mental psyche of young Black people in certain communities. And so part of his agenda is also to implement programs that are going to address issues when it comes to the mental health of the youth. I think one of the things that I'm most excited about, and Mayor Lightfoot here in Chicago actually brought this forward, is the fact that he's going to be looking at where guns are coming in from into New York. When you look at a city like Chicago, for instance, when you think about the fact that 60% of the guns that are tied to crime in the city of Chicago are coming from states outside of the city of Chicago, that is a huge problem. And that is something else that Eric Adams is going to be looking at, because Chicago, New York, we have some of the toughest gun laws, but yet our crime is still so high. So I think getting to the bottom of that is definitely going to be something we need to bridge the gap on.
Zeke, we're up against the clock here. I'll give you the last word, though. What do you think of having the idea of a police captain running things in New York City?
Well, I think it's great. I think, he knows how we work as cops. I think that he understands different intricacies of the police department. One of my biggest critics as far as defund the police and a lot of elected officials go is that they have all these opinions and all these ideas about how to do policing, and they have never been cops. Eric Adams brings a fresh breath. So if he's going to go ahead and work with the police and empower the police and allow the police to do their jobs and actively go after criminals and not be soft on crime, then I support him.
Rochelle, Ritchie, and Zeek Arkham, it's great to have you both tonight with us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How young is too young? Chicago Public Schools set to offer free condoms to fifth graders. We'll talk about that ahead. Plus, the billion-dollar question should be the taxing of the wealth of the super rich. Possibly, Senator Bernie Sanders calls the wealth of Amazon's founder morally obscene. That's ahead. Morally obscene. That's how Senator Bernie Sanders recently described the wealth of astronaut-to-be Jeff Bezos. Sanders, a self-described democratic socialist, tweeted this: Jeff Bezos makes some $2,537 every second of the day. Got that? That means the richest guy on the face of planet makes nearly 3 times more in 1 second than the median worker in this country makes in an entire week. That is morally obscene. Tax the billionaires. Morris Pearl is the chair of Patriotic Millionaires. What exactly is that group? Let's start there, Morris.
Sure. We have a group of hundreds of wealthy people from around the country, and we understand that it's not sustainable if the rich are getting richer and richer and richer, and millions of Americans are not getting by. So we united to change our policies to alleviate this growing inequality that's getting worse than ever in history.
How do we change the policies? What do you want to see? You want to see the rich pay more?
We need to see the rich people paying at least the same tax rates as people like you who work for a living. Part of the problem is that people like me and Jeff Bezos, who get all of our income from investments, pay tax rates far lower than people like you who get a paycheck every week with taxes deducted from it.
Yeah, there are some who might argue just how hard I work, Morris, but we'll leave that there for the moment. But let me ask you this. This isn't really then about what Jeff Bezos makes, in your opinion. I mean, that's the ultimate American dream, isn't it? I think anyone would probably trade positions with him, become a successful and wealthy entrepreneur, and then fly to space. It's not that as much as it is what they pay in the end.
Yeah. I mean, we're a group called the Patriotic Millionaires. We think everybody should become a millionaire. We think it's great to be a millionaire and be rich. And if Jeff Bezos wants to take a fraction of % of his wealth and use it to travel up to space, good for him. That's fine. But there's no reason that he should be paying taxes at a far lower rate than people who work for a living. That's making the rich get richer and richer and richer, and everyone else just barely getting by. And that's not right.
Do the Patriotic Millionaires just write checks to the government? Is that how part of the membership? Because you could.
Well, sure, we could. And if the only problem was my personal money, sure, we could do that. The problem is the system. We have a system in the United States that allows investors, people who don't work, people like me who just sit here and watch our wealth grow on the computer screen, pay much lower tax rates than people who work for a living. That is the problem. I sit here and get wealthier without doing anything because I have a lot of money invested. But then when I go out for lunch to where I used to get fettuccine with mushrooms, it's closed and those people are unemployed. Right.
Yeah.
And that's not only bad for them, it's bad for their landlords. It's bad for the guys who own the bars where they used to go drinking on Fridays. That's bad for everybody, and we have to correct that.
You talk about the money that you have invested, Morris. I want to show you something you may have seen from Mark Cuban, where when talking about the tax system, he said, I don't keep cash in the bank, it's invested. If you tax me on my net worth, I'm going to have to sell a lot, not just a little, but a lot. You know better than many how this works. Does he have a point?
Well, yes, if you tax somebody on their wealth, they have to sell some of that wealth. But the point is that most Americans already pay a wealth tax. People like you pay real estate tax every single year, and most Americans do, and that's most of their wealth for most people. But rich people like Mark Cuban or Jeff Bezos or even me, a tiny fraction of our wealth is in real estate, our homes, but most of our wealth is our stock portfolios. And we need to change back to the way this country was created. And the way it became great was the wealthy people paying taxes on their wealth.
What would you like to see changed primarily? I mean, even Warren Buffett has said he thinks he should pay more taxes. Bezos, there were a couple of years, and I don't think that report that came out certainly helped their argument any. What needs to change or what could change to make this more of an issue? Because they're doing I guess they're playing by the rules now.
They are. The problem is the rules need to be changed. You know, we were in the White House when President Obama talked about the Buffett rule. And the basic problem is that investors have lower tax rates than people who work for a living. That's why he pays lower tax rates than his secretary does. And that's not fair. We need to make investors who make investment income pay at least the same tax rates as people like you who work for a living. That's what we have to change.
What are the Patriotic Millionaires doing to change that?
I mean, we are trying to explain to our congresspeople, our representatives, and our senators what needs to be done in order to make the tax system more fair. Basically, we are showing up with actual rich people, actual business people, members of our organization, and explaining to congresspeople, it's just not true that we're going to take all of our money and move to, I don't know, Zimbabwe or someplace if you raise taxes. You know, they say, oh, rich people won't invest money if, you tax them, but we don't have any choice. So I'm not going to keep my money under my mattress where it's getting zero return.
Right.
Regardless of tax rates, I'd rather make some profit and pay some taxes than make no profit at all.
Yeah. Morris Pearl, it's great to chat with you, head of Patriotic Millionaires. I'm guessing my invitation to the club got lost in the mail, I'm thinking.
Anytime you like, you can come down. We'd be glad to have you.
All right, Morris, thanks for the time. Take care.
Thank you. Great to be on the show.
NFL Hall of Fame wide receiver Terrell Owens joins us ahead. What's he think of paying college athletes? And more importantly, the latest vintage of Cabernet. He knows a lot about both, and we'll talk to him coming up. When school returns next month in Chicago, students as young as 5th grade will have free access to condoms. Is that too young? We'll talk about it next. Learning about the birds and bees in school, well, that's a rite of passage a lot of us will never forget, especially the uncomfortable conversations, the teacher who had to give the lesson, and all the embarrassed classmates. Well, in Chicago, add to that condoms. Chicago Public Schools making them available to students as early as the 5th grade. The district releasing a statement to us today saying our policy removes barriers to access and ensures students can discreetly obtain products that they otherwise may not be able to afford or feel comfortable purchasing. Karla Altmayer is the founder of Healing to Action. That's a group that's advocating for sexual education. Karla, it's great to have you. A lot of people have questions about all of this, and I know the policy is yet to still be sort of nailed down in its final form. But the first thing that came to my mind anyway was that 5th grade seems awfully early to be offering condoms. I realize I'm old and out of touch, but am I missing something here?
Well, it's great to be on your show. And yeah, I think for some people who may not be talking with youth about sexual education or about sex may think that that's really young, but kids are actually having those questions even in the 4th grade. So really 5th grade is just an opportunity to begin to provide resources to young kids and being able to help them to, be able to navigate those relationships. I think the real question, though, is, are condoms enough? And they're not.
For 5th graders?
They're not. CPS has had this history of trying to find a quick solution to a more complicated problem. And ultimately, the Chicago public school system really needs to invest in beyond doing that and investing in the educators who are providing trainings to the educator training, and then also caregiver support so that caregivers can actually have meaningful conversations with their youth. So when their youth are seeing condoms in the bathroom, they're able to talk with their parents about that and be able to make an informed decision.
Right. I don't know how, again, this would work, and maybe you can share some of your insight on how other districts do it, but is it, how are they offered? How does the district do this? Is there like a bowl in the principal's office with condoms in it?
So from what we've learned, that they will be available kind of in different places in the school. It seems like in the bathroom or in other places in like a little bowl. And again, we think that that's fine, but that's not what is needed to really address, make sure that youth are able to make decisions and have healthy relationships. And I think the chief health officer recently, Dr. Kenneth Fox, had said that that's the purpose of this policy. But if really that's the purpose of this policy, he would couple this part of the policy with additional resources for educators to receive training and support for caregivers so that caregivers can have conversations with youth about sex.
Yeah, well, and I don't mean to harp on the condom question, but I didn't know much about this either. As far as today, I looked it up. And how old do you have to be to buy a condom at a pharmacy or a CVS or something? And there isn't an age limit. You can be any age and buy them. When do you think they should be offered as part of this curriculum you're talking about?
I mean, I think that the age of, the age of 5th grade makes sense in the sense that a lot of kids at that point are hitting puberty. They are having questions about their bodies. We've looked at questions at the anonymous questions that youth have at the time, and they're asking about sex. They're asking what their body is doing, and they're trying to figure that out. And so again, the resource of condoms, and I think it's really easy to just say, oh, well, condoms, like, is that good or bad? But the reality is that it's much more of a complex response because our sexuality is complex. And what we need is a space to be able to have conversations, a space to be able to identify what is a healthy relationship and what is not, and a place to understand concepts like consent, where we can then be able to engage in make clear decisions about whether we even want to use a condom in the first place.
And there's a lot involved here as well. I mean, you're talking about parental involvement, conversations that these kids may be uncomfortable having with a parent that they might be more comfortable having with someone at school who's removed from that home situation, whether they can afford it, whether this is something that's taboo to talk about in the home or in other places. There is a lot at play here that you are involved with in how a district comes up with this policy.
Yes, exactly. I think for us, we see, especially with the group of people who have led this campaign for Sex Ed Works, they are survivors of gender-based violence. They are immigrants. And so when CPS puts in their policy that parents are primarily responsible for providing sexual education to their kids, these parents are saying, like, I don't have that. I don't have the tools. How do I know how to have a conversation about my kids or even open up a conversation around this issue? So for us, those tools are really important for CPS to invest in the community and say, we're not just only going to give you condoms, we're going to give parents an orientation around what they should expect their kids to be learning. We're going to hand out questions ahead of time so parents understand what kind of questions their kids are going to ask and strategies to be able to answer them.
There was another number we found today, which was interesting, Karla. The CDC reported that as of 2018, fewer than half of U.S. high schools and less than 1/5 of middle schools were teaching, quote, key topics for sexual health education. That surprised me. Is that accurate, and is that something that you would agree with or have found?
Yes, I mean, I think unfortunately there isn't a federal standard for what should be taught for sexual education, and it's been left up to the states, and so each state kind of decides on their own. And there's really kind of like two types of sexual education curricula. There's like an abstinence only, where they preach abstinence only, or some states that do have comprehensive sexual education. And recently, Illinois passed a law that improved the curriculum across the state to make it aligned with the best practice standards for comprehensive sexual education.
Karla Altmayer, founder of Healing to Action. We appreciate your time and your information tonight. Have a good evening.
Thanks so much for having us.
College athletes now getting paid. We'll ask T.O. what he thinks that'll mean for his UTC mocks. That's coming up next. And don't forget, you can follow us on social media at the Donlon Report on Twitter. July 1st marked a major breakthrough in college sports. The NCAA adopted a policy allowing athletes to profit from their name, image, and likeness. 24 states have passed their own NIL laws, as they're called, with several states working on similar legislation. Critics say student athletes are being compensated appropriately as amateur players, but coaches, students, and legislators, among others, have argued these new laws are, well, they're just plain fair. Joining us now with his perspective on the new rules is NFL Hall of Famer Terrell Owens. T.O., it's great to have you. We all knew this was coming. It was just a matter of time. Now that it's here, though, are you okay with it? You like it?
Absolutely. You think about the number of years and that so many colleges, universities have really kind of profited on the names and images and likeness of all these players all these years. You think about especially some of the top guys and even some of the guys not on the, really a big part of the team that they've capitalized on. So I think this law here kind of puts these kids in a position not only to help themselves, but I think the ability to be able to learn how to go out and market themselves, negotiate deals here and there. And so they get to understand what that's like to be able to be their own boss.
Are you worried at all, T.O., about where it's going, especially recruiting? The one thing we hear a lot about is that, and it could become basically a money game now. I mean, you've got a lot of big schools with a lot of big boosters, and you've got a senior from high school coming in, and they say, hey, we'll give you an endorsement for this, and off we go. I mean, we're already seeing it in some universities. These numbers are going to be huge.
Well, I mean, there's always going to be the what ifs and a lot of the negative that comes with it. And I think as this thing rolls out, I think they'll have a better idea of how to manage these types of situations. And again, like I said, some of these kids, again, they're going to be able to enter the world of what they're going to be entering once they leave college. So with everything, there's going to be some ups and downs. You're going to kind of have to filter out and figure out how to manage these types of situations. And I think it'll iron itself out as it progresses.
Let's talk about your life after the NFL. You're in the wine business now. I understand you weren't necessarily a big wine drinker. Tell us how that started.
Well, obviously, I think a lot of things shifted. A lot of people pivoted once the pandemic hit. And so I'm no different than anybody else trying to figure out, okay, what's next? And so I came on this opportunity through a mutual friend. I have a marketing agent, and he's a mutual friend of Tommy Lasorda.
Right.
God rest his soul. He just passed recently. Mm-hmm. And so they wanted to basically figure out how they can collaborate with a particular athlete. They had a number of people on their list. I was one of those guys. And so, again, I'm a fan of anything that is bold as I am. And so when you think of Cabernets, it's big, bold, and it's known for being dry. I don't really associate myself with the dry part. But again, This was a great opportunity. And it's been very, very intriguing, very, very and I've become very knowledgeable about the process as I've learned more and more about it. But again, if you have a palate for reds, especially plum preserves, dark chocolate, spicy toasted oak, and kind of some cinnamon stick aromas, my wine 81 is definitely for you.
Look at you. So that is the label. It's beautiful, by the way, 81, which is your number, of course. And it's also a nod to Kobe Bryant, which is interesting. Another part of this story, too.
Absolutely.
Theo.
Absolutely. Kobe and I were good friends. And so as he was with so many of people that he's come across. And so, again, obviously with what he's done and what he did with his career, I was a fan of his. He was a fan of mine. And so I thought it was only fitting, especially understanding that he had a shoe collection. And I think it was kind of, derived around, wine and vino. And so around this time, like I said, we all miss Kobe dearly. And so I just wanted to obviously, pay a little homage, toward he and what he's done, and obviously his family and what they're enduring right now. So yeah, I mean, I've been a fan of Kobe, and so definitely I was very instrumental in the entire process, even from the tasting notes, talking to the winemaker, Terry Colton, who basically he helped with the Lasorda family wines.
Right.
And so obviously, even from the aesthetics of the bottle, I was very, very dialed in with it.
All right. Hey, bite of the night time, and we're going to ask you to join along. There's some video of you we found on Twitter that was recently posted. You were at Deion Sanders' camp for high school and JC players. And based on this video, which is getting a lot of play, you've still got it, my man.
Well, I don't think I ever lost it.
There you go.
Honestly, like I said, it's just a matter of me, having the opportunity to end my career the way that I wanted to. I really always felt that I still had the ability to play. And so, again, like I said, I was just basically just out there really just in support of Deion and what he's doing for those kids at that HBCU school, Jackson State, and just for a lot of kids across the country that need and want an opportunity to play football. They can go to Jackson State University. They definitely are dialed in. They have all the resources there to become successful student athletes.
Hey, it's great to have you, T.O. I love that picture behind you. Next time we'll talk about your favorite touchdown celebrations. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Awesome.
Prime's coming up next with Marnie.